When Lena Grace stepped under the spotlight in that worn earth-brown sweater, the air in the auditorium turned a little colder. She didn't belong there, not to the rows of performance students with tailored blazers and perfect postures, not to the golden circle of polished voices and legacy names. "She's not even a vocal major," someone muttered with a snort. Laughter, thin, clipped, cruel. Sabrina Knox, reigning queen of the vocal department, tilted her head and smiled that polite, poisonous smile. "Let's give her a chance," she said sweetly. "After all, everyone deserves a moment. A moment to fail." That was the unspoken part. But Lena didn't flinch. She walked to the mic like someone walking into an old room they once called home. No prelude, no pitch pipe. She closed her eyes, drew in a single breath, and sang. One note, a simple one, low, sure, stripped of pretense, but full of something so old and aching it stopped time. The room held its breath. Someone near me whispered, "Who is she?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because I was too busy remembering a tone like that. Florence, 2007. Masterclass with Maestro Lotti. Sabrina's smile cracked. Her knuckles turned white around the mic. Lena just stood there, calm, steady, unaware that she had just changed the temperature of an entire room. And it all began the moment she stepped up, as the representative no one invited and no one expected. They posted the lineup on a Monday morning, pinned crooked to the bulletin board outside the auditorium, names typed in bold beneath each department header. Music performance, vocal studies, classical instrumentation, all the usual suspects. And then, down near the bottom, a name that didn't belong. Under visual communication, there it was. Lena Grace, solo vocal entry. It took less than 5 minutes for the whispers to start. Someone from design, singing. By noon, it was a joke. "Guess they're letting the artsy kids play make-believe now," a baritone major muttered over coffee. "Maybe she'll sing with a paintbrush." Sabrina Knox heard it too, naturally. She always knew where the spotlight was before it even turned on. She skimmed the list with one eyebrow raised, her voice soft and syrupy. "Looks like the visual kids want a taste of the main stage. Cute." A couple of her groupies giggled, quick and sharp, like applause in reverse. The coordinator, a middle-aged adjunct with a clipboard and too much caffeine in his veins, tried to sound diplomatic. Every department has a right to nominate. This year, Visual Comm picked Lena. He said it flatly, like a disclaimer, like a mistake he didn't want credit for. Rehearsal day came fast. Lena arrived early, alone, clutching a folded paper with her sheet music, edges worn like something reread too many times. She wore jeans, scuffed sneakers, and that same old sweater the color of dry earth. No makeup, no earrings, no entourage, just her. She sat in the back row until her name was called, while around her students swapped vocal warm-ups like trading cards. Sabrina glided past in a velvet jacket that probably cost more than Lena's semester tuition, flashing her a glance that said, "Good luck, sweetheart in the way, only mean girls can." Lena stood slowly when her name echoed from the mic. No one clapped. She didn't expect them to. She walked toward the stage with a quiet steadiness, like someone who'd climbed harder stairs in heavier shoes. Her eyes didn't dart or plead. They simply looked ahead, like she'd made peace with something long ago and now carried the echo of it inside her. I saw her pass under the arch of lights, and, for a brief second, I caught the faintest tremble in her right hand. But her face didn't move. Not a smile, not a frown, just focus. Like a lens locking onto something miles ahead. Sabrina leaned in close to another singer and whispered, "Maybe she's doing spoken word." Or interpretive silence. No one laughed, but not because it wasn't cruel. It just didn't land. Because Lena, at that moment, looked too real to mock, too solid to shake. She stepped up to the mic, adjusted it with the care of someone who respected sound, not show. And before a single note had left her throat, something in the room shifted, the kind of shift you don't see, only feel, like a tide rolling in below your feet. That was the thing about Lena Grace. Her presence alone already sang louder than half the voices in that room. The air in the rehearsal hall thickened as the technician adjusted the gain levels and rechecked the input feed, but the tension in the room had nothing to do with cables or soundboards. It came from eyes, from whispers, from the way Sabrina Knox leaned in, close enough for her perfume to curl into Lena's breath, and whispered just loud enough to be overheard. "Don't worry, everyone gets nervous their first time, especially when they're a little out of place among professionals." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. Lena didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just looked at the mic stand, not at the girl who treated the whole process like a social hierarchy. Nearby, a group of vocal majors had their phones tilted just so, live streaming behind lifted backpacks and whispered commentary. One caption read, "Visual arts major tries singing. Tune in for comedy." Someone added laughing emojis, the kind that sting more than they amuse. A guy in a leather jacket snorted, nudged his friend, said, "I bet she picked something from Disney. That or Adele. Always Adele." Another girl, chewing gum like it was her job, rolled her eyes and said, "Can we just get to Sabrina's part already?" But Lena heard none of it, or at least pretended not to. She stepped forward, hands not quite steady, reaching up to adjust the mic. Her fingers trembled. Not dramatically, but enough for the vultures to circle. Someone chuckled under their breath, not loud, but cruel enough. That quiet, cutting kind of laugh meant to find a crack in your confidence and rip it open. Lena unfolded her sheet music carefully, like it was something sacred. The paper was creased 4 times, worn at the corners, edges soft from years of being folded and unfolded like a secret too precious to destroy. It wasn't fresh from a printer like everyone else's. No, this had been carried through time, maybe tucked inside a drawer beside old piano books, or beneath sketch pads layered with charcoal dreams. As she looked down at the notes, her mouth didn't move, but her eyes did. They darkened for half a second, and something passed through them. It wasn't fear, it wasn't stage fright, it was memory. The kind that walks beside you like a shadow. The kind that sings to you when the rest of the world tells you to be quiet. A professor near the front row noticed and leaned forward, sensing something that didn't quite fit the room. But the rest? They were too busy crafting punchlines in their heads, too busy preparing to feel superior. That's the thing with performance schools. Talent is currency, but image is law. And Lena had broken the dress code of expectation. No sparkles, no vocal warm-ups loud enough to be heard backstage. Just her music, and the kind of silence people mistook for weakness. Sabrina wasn't done. She turned to a guy next to her, pretended to fix her earring, and murmured, "She's brave, I'll give her that. Singing here without training, that's like walking into a gunfight with a poem." The boy laughed. "Hope it's a good poem." Across the room, one of the sound techs adjusted the monitor volume and glanced at Lena like he was trying to guess the exact moment she'd break. But she didn't. Not then, not yet. She looked up at the empty auditorium seats, most of them filled with people who already decided who deserved applause and who didn't. And she waited. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't say hello. She just stood there, and the silence stretched so long that someone coughed out of awkwardness. Still, Lena stayed in that pause, in that quiet pocket of breath where courage has to hold its ground without armor. A girl in the 4th row checked her phone. Another one whispered, "She's stalling." But she wasn't. She was remembering, not the room, not the audience, but maybe her old teacher's voice, maybe the smell of the studio she used to practice in as a kid, when music wasn't performance. It was the only place she didn't have to explain herself. And now she stood here again, older, quieter, wearing memories like armor no one else could see. Someone clicked their pen. Another person yawned, loud and performative. Still, Lena didn't flinch. She looked back at her paper one last time, then folded it again, pressing it flat like she had done 100 times before. One more breath, not deep, not dramatic, just honest. She stepped up to the mic again, adjusted it by half an inch, and put both hands behind her back to keep them from shaking. Sabrina crossed her arms, unimpressed. Someone near the back whispered, "Let's just get this over with." But something in the room, barely perceptible, had started to shift. Maybe not for everyone, not yet. But for those who knew what it looked like when a person stood on the edge of something that mattered, it was clear. Lena wasn't here to prove anything. She wasn't here to dazzle. She was here to remember. And even before she sang, that intention alone was louder than the noise surrounding her. Lena didn't start with volume. She didn't burst into sound like so many of the others who came before her, trying to impress from the first breath. No, she began the way someone opens a door, they've been afraid to touch for years, slow, deliberate, honest. And when the first line of "she used to be mine" slipped from her mouth, it wasn't performance, it was confession, raw and measured, like each word had been tasted before she let it go. And for the first time since she walked on stage, no one spoke, no one whispered, even the phones went still, forgotten in motionless hands. And that in itself was a miracle. She wasn't showy, didn't stretch notes into high-wire tricks, or belt with that "I can hit that too" energy that filled so many auditions. Instead, she sang with something older, something lived in, her voice pressed into the lyrics like they were carved from her own ribs. And that kind of singing, the kind that doesn't ask for applause but leaves no room for doubt, that kind creeps into the bones of a room without asking. A young professor seated near the judges' table leaned forward, squinting slightly, then turned to the colleague beside him and whispered, "Where did she train?" The other shook his head. "She's not in the program, not in any of ours." Across the sound booth, a technician furrowed his brow, fingers paused on the mixing console, eyes fixed on her mouth. "That diction, that breath control," he murmured, not to anyone in particular. "She's been trained. That's Italian method, bel canto. That's not something you just pick up off YouTube." He wasn't wrong. You don't fake that kind of resonance, not the way she sustained her vowels, not the way she let silence breathe between notes like it was part of the melody itself. And the judges, well, something had shifted there too. One of them, a woman known for rarely raising an eyebrow at anything short of genius, had stopped taking notes. Her pen hovered above her clipboard, frozen mid-comment. Another had uncrossed his arms, fingers now pressed together, as if praying or calculating or both. Sabrina noticed. Oh, she noticed. Her eyes darted from face to face, clocking each change like a general watching her soldiers turn. Her posture stiffened, lips tight, chin slightly lifted in defiance, but even she could feel it. The stage was no longer hers. Someone in the back, a freshman probably, opened their phone and started typing furiously. Lena's name, her department, anything. No vocal recitals under her name. No listed classes, no scholarship tags. Just a dusty, half-forgotten result from a county youth vocal competition a decade old. One photo. A teenage girl with braces and nervous eyes holding a trophy too big for her hands. The caption read, "First place, Junior Classical Division, Lena G." That was it. No videos, no fanfare. Just proof that once she had stood somewhere else and been heard. The room was listening differently now, not just to her voice, but to the story it was telling without words. Lena didn't move much on stage, didn't gesture, didn't emote the way they taught in performance class. She let her stillness speak, let the tension rest in her shoulders and the tremble just barely caught in her lower lip. This wasn't polish, this wasn't theater. This was grief braided into melody, strength pulled from scar tissue. Even the phrasing was deliberate. Where others might have held a note just to prove they could, she let it go, early sometimes, like the sound itself was too personal to show off. It made people lean in. It made silence feel heavier. By the second verse, no one was thinking about her department. No one was calculating grade point averages or performance credits. They were just there, with her, inside that aching space of a song that had been sung 100 times before. But never like this. Never like someone reclaiming a piece of herself in front of the very people who once told her to leave it behind. A janitor standing near the exit paused his sweeping. A student assistant with a clipboard stopped checking off the names. And in the back corner, one of the older professors, a man with gray at his temples and a reputation for brutal critique, leaned to the coordinator and said quietly, "If she had applied to vocal studies 4 years ago, I would have taken her. Hell, I'd take her now." The coordinator didn't respond. He just stared at Lena like someone watching a ghost walk back into the room it died in. Sabrina glanced toward the judges' table again, her throat dry. This wasn't supposed to happen. The outsider wasn't supposed to win the room. Lena finished the last chorus with a note so soft it felt like dusk settling on water, her voice thinning. Not because she was weak, but because the moment demanded tenderness, not force. Then silence. No bow, no dramatic hand gesture. Just Lena standing there, breathing, eyes focused on a place beyond the stage where only she could see. No one moved, no one dared to be the first to clap. Even that felt like it might break something holy. And somewhere in the back of the room, I whispered to no one in particular, "You feel that shift in the air yet? Don't blink. You'll miss history repeating itself." Because I'd seen this before, years ago, in Florence, in Chicago, in Detroit basements and Parisian studios. I'd seen what it looks like when someone who wasn't supposed to matter walks into a room and makes it theirs not by force, but by truth. Lena Grace didn't just sing a song, she cracked something open, and the echo was only just beginning. The crescendo came not with fireworks, but with control, that rare kind of still power that doesn't demand the room's attention, but commands it quietly, like gravity. Lena reached the bridge of the song, that fragile, exposed place where most singers either soar or stumble, and held the note. Not to impress, not to dazzle, but to sustain, to mean it, to keep it alive just long enough for everyone listening to remember what heartbreak sounded like when they first heard it in their own lives. Her breath didn't shake, her pitch didn't waver. She didn't milk the moment, didn't let the note swell beyond what the lyric asked for. She just held it, pure, balanced, and aching. And when she let it go, it wasn't a release. It was a goodbye. That was when the silence fell. Not the kind that asks for applause, but the kind that forbids it. No one moved, no one shifted in their seats. Even Sabrina Knox, who had been fidgeting with her phone case just minutes earlier, sat frozen, mouth parted slightly like she was trying to find the script and realizing it had been thrown out. The room wasn't just quiet, it was reckoning. I watched an entire auditorium full of skeptics, critics, ego-fueled prodigies, and battle-worn professors try to process what they had just seen and heard. The head of the music faculty stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, in the only sound brave enough to exist. He cleared his throat, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned hall, "is the first time I've heard a non-major interpret a Broadway piece with this level of emotional calibration." The phrase he chose wasn't praise for raw talent. It was recognition of understanding. That's what shook them. Not that Lena had a voice, many people do. Not even that she could sing with perfect breath control. That could be taught. What couldn't be taught was the why behind every note. That lived-in quality. That way of knowing what not to sing, what to feel instead. Then came the voice that had waited to interrupt. Sabrina, never one to surrender center stage without a fight, rose from her seat and smoothed her velvet blazer like she was preparing for an interview. Her voice was light, but laced with venom, just enough to infect without sounding unprofessional. And this is also the first time a non-vocal student is being considered for a main stage performance, isn't it? A murmur stirred in the audience. The professors turned, some surprised, some annoyed. The head judge tilted his head and replied without blinking. That may be true, but music does not care about majors. It never has. It only cares about truth and technique. And Lena Grace brought both. It was one of those answers that ends a conversation, not invites one. Still, the damage was visible. Sabrina's shoulders tensed, her jaw working like it wanted to speak again, but couldn't find purchase. Lena, meanwhile, simply bowed her head. Not deep, not dramatic. Just enough to mark gratitude without demanding acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked off the stage. The walk wasn't rushed. It wasn't triumphant either. It was something harder to define. It was resolved. That kind of quiet departure only comes from people who aren't trying to win the room. They're reclaiming something that was once taken. As she stepped into the wings, the sound returned in layers. A single clap, then another, then a wave, uncoordinated but powerful, rising from silence like a tide that didn't need permission. Even the skeptics clapped now. The irony was, she wasn't even there to hear it. Lena was already gone. In the hallway behind the auditorium, a junior from the tech crew stood against the wall, still holding his clipboard. He looked at her as she passed and said, "That was the realest thing I've ever heard in here." She smiled, not with pride, but with something gentler, recognition. The kind of smile you give when someone sees past the surface. Back in the auditorium, the judges conferred briefly. Then the announcement came. Lena Grace would perform solo in the closing act of the university's year-end concert. It was official. It was unanimous. It was earned. The bulletin board would be updated the next morning. Her name, once a curiosity at the bottom of the list, would now stand alone in bold. And for the first time in that program's long, competitive history, the final spotlight would fall not on a star student of the vocal department, but on someone who wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Someone who sang not because she belonged, but because she remembered. Because she refused to forget what her voice was for. Later that evening, the music department office stayed open a little longer than usual. One of the senior professors, an old tenor who rarely spoke unless prompted, stood by the window in silence, sipping cold coffee and re-watching Lena's performance from a student's phone. He said nothing at first, but his eyes were red, not from age, from something else. He finally muttered to no one in particular. She sang that, like someone who's lost something she still loves. A teaching assistant nearby nodded slowly, not sure what else to say. Down the hall, in the practice rooms, a couple of vocal students had stopped rehearsing and were listening to the playback through the thin walls. One of them, a first year who had idolized Sabrina for months, said softly, "I didn't know a song could make you feel like that." The other just stared at the speaker, eyes wide. Outside the building, Lena sat on the back steps with a warm tea cupped in her hands. She hadn't gone home, not yet. The adrenaline was still fading, and with it came the weight of everything she had carried onto that stage. Her phone buzzed. Her mother had texted. Just 3 words. "I'm so proud." Lena didn't reply right away. She just stared at the message, then closed her eyes and let the quiet wrap around her like a long-lost coat. Behind her, the auditorium lights went dark one by one, like stars blinking out, making space for new ones to rise. And for the first time in years, Lena felt like she hadn't just survived the moment. She had become it. Later that week, something strange started happening. A student-run blog posted a clip from Lena's performance, grainy and dim, recorded from the far back row. But it didn't matter. Within hours, it had thousands of views, dozens of comments, and suddenly, people from outside the music department were quoting her phrasing, tagging the lyrics in posts about heartbreak and resilience. One comment read, "I don't know who she is, but I haven't cried like that in years." Another simply said, "She meant it." You could tell. Faculty members who rarely agreed on anything began mentioning her performance in casual conversation. A pianist from the jazz division asked if she'd be open to a collaboration. An old theory professor added her name to a lecture on emotional integrity and musical interpretation. Even the dean sent out a school-wide email praising the concert's surprising brilliance. But Lena didn't respond to any of it. She kept going to class quietly, headphones in, her sketchbook in hand. A few students tried to talk to her, awkward and well-meaning, but she'd just smile and nod. She didn't crave the attention. She'd already had the moment she needed. Everything after that was just noise. The notes she sang that day still lingered in the walls, in whispers, in the pauses between lectures. Some said she should go pro. Others wondered where she'd been hiding, but Lena knew exactly where she'd been. She hadn't been hiding. She'd just been waiting. For the right time, to remind the world that a voice doesn't fade just because it's been quiet. It remembers. And when it finally speaks again, it doesn't ask for permission. It arrives. Sabrina Knox was used to being watched. Her walk, her posture, the way her voice curved at the end of a phrase. Everything about her had been cultivated to command attention. But after the announcement, something shifted. It wasn't immediate. It was slower, subtler, the way seasons change without asking permission. Students didn't look away from her, but they didn't look the same. Their eyes held something new. Comparison. Doubt. A question she had never invited into the room. Lena Grace's name was everywhere. Not shouted, not screamed, but remembered, whispered, referenced, respected. For Sabrina, that was worse than applause. It was endurance. Lena's moment hadn't flared up and vanished. It had stayed, settled into the wood of the rehearsal hall floors, the glass of the practice room windows. Some students began to hum her song between classes, not as mimicry, but as something they didn't want to forget. A second year wrote about her for a composition essay. A third year drew her in a mural near the staircase. One freshman posted, "She didn't just sing, she proved something I didn't even know needed proving." Sabrina smiled less. She laughed in shorter bursts. When someone mentioned Lena's name in the dressing room, she didn't correct them, but she left earlier than usual. The edge had dulled, not from lack of talent, but from collision with something truer than polish. She started staying later in the practice rooms, but her runs felt hollow now, as though she were chasing a sound that wasn't hers. One night, she stood staring at herself in the mirror, whispering the same lyric over and over, not because she wanted to perform it, but because she needed to understand it. The program committee offered a duet. They said it could be powerful. 2 women, 2 voices, 1 song, a symbol of unity. Lena declined with a calm that made her answer sound rehearsed, even though it wasn't. I don't need to prove I belong. I just needed one chance to sing for the people who thought I didn't. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look at Sabrina. She just walked away. And that, more than anything, was the note that stuck. For Lena, the performance wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about being heard. It was about restoring something quietly personal. Her voice wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. And when she sang, everyone saw themselves inside it, whether they liked what they saw or not. On the night of the concert, Lena stood backstage with her shoulders back, hands relaxed. She didn't wear anything extravagant, just black, simple, sharp. Her voice warmed in private, no theatrics, no distractions. When her name was announced, the applause that followed wasn't wild, it was solid, built not from hype, but respect. She walked into the light without hesitation. She sang, and again she meant it. Every word, every pause, every silence. The song she chose wasn't famous. It didn't have a key change or a glory note, but it had truth. She had chosen it because it felt like her, quiet, unassuming, but anchored. And when it was over, there was no question, no murmurs, no comparisons. Just the sound of hands coming together because something true had just passed through the room. And somewhere in the back, Sabrina clapped too. Not because she had to, but because she finally understood. Lena hadn't stolen anything. She had simply returned what should never have been taken. After the show, Sabrina stood outside near the loading dock, arms crossed, not sure what she was waiting for. Maybe an apology, maybe closure. What she got was Lena walking past her with a nod. Not cold, not cruel, just a nod. Sabrina opened her mouth to say something, but the words never came. She just watched Lena disappear into the night, her pace unhurried, her presence intact. The next day, Sabrina stayed late after rehearsal and told her voice coach she wanted to change her recital song. "Why?" he asked. She paused, then said, "Because I want to mean it this time, not just sing it." And maybe that was the real performance Lena had given. Not just the one on stage, but the one that rippled silently into other people's choices. The one that didn't end with applause, but with introspection. She didn't win a trophy, she didn't land a recording contract, but she left behind something heavier than gold. She left behind proof that stillness can be louder than applause, that sincerity can rewrite status, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sing one note, not to impress, but to heal. And for those who were listening, that was enough. Some moments don't echo through thunder. They settle in quietly and build a silence that changes people from the inside out. I remember the night not by the program or the performers or the sound check chaos that usually clutters my mind during these events. I remember it because of one note, one clear, steady, defiant note sung by a girl who didn't belong, at least not on paper. My name is Thomas Evers, faculty coordinator for the university's year-end concert, and I've seen dozens of shows. But that night was different. That night made me reconsider everything I thought I knew. I had watched Lena Grace walk onto that stage with the quiet presence of someone who wasn't trying to win. She was simply returning. Returning to herself, maybe. Returning to something she'd once been told to leave behind. And when she sang, it was as if the entire auditorium exhaled at the same time. Like we'd all been holding our breath for a student we didn't even realize we were waiting for. She didn't come from our department. She didn't have a showcase reel or a list of recitals to her name, but she had lived something, and she brought it with her into every vowel, every silence, every restrained vibrato. That kind of performance doesn't happen because of training. It happens because of memory, because of pain, because of love. I sat there as her voice rang out, and I remember thinking, so this is what truth sounds like when it's not filtered through expectation. After the applause faded, I wrote her name down in my notes, not for scoring, not for feedback, just so I wouldn't forget it, because I knew someday someone would ask me if I'd ever seen a moment like that, and I'd want to remember the name of the girl who didn't just sing. She reminded us all why we listen. If this story resonated with you, consider hitting like. If it challenged you, leave a comment. And if you want more stories that stay with you, go ahead and subscribe.